Disgraced music mogul Sean Diddy Combs remains behind bars in a Brooklyn, New York federal jail, a stark difference from his mansions in South Florida and Los Angeles. This week, the once famed producer's fall from grace came to a head when he was arrested in New York City and charged with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. While appearing in front of a federal judge on Tuesday, he pleaded not guilty to the crimes. Diddy was once known for his boisterous personality, often appearing as a fun-loving guy who would host great parties, including his now infamous White Party. But since his fall from grace, many who have filed lawsuits against him allege sinister activities were going on behind the scenes. At the center of the government's case against Diddy are his alleged freak-offs, which according to the indictment were elaborate and produced sex performances that Diddy arranged, directed, pleasured himself to, and often electronically recorded. But the freak-offs were first alluded to in Cassie's now settled federal civil lawsuit that was filed in November of last year and settled within a day. In the suit, it says Diddy would repeatedly ask Cassie at random moments that he wanted a freak-off or FO, and she was expected to facilitate the location and hiring of male sex workers. The suit would go on to say during their relationship, the mogul would insist on an FO weekly, which would often take place in hotel suites. It's alleged Diddy would pay to fly male sex workers to his location, which included cities in the United States, and he would require Cassie and his staff to help him make these arrangements. According to the federal indictment against him, when the federal agents searched through his homes during the raids, they seized drugs and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. In Cassie's suit, she alleged Diddy's assistant, who also set up the freak-offs, would stock the hotel suites with baby oil and Astroglide. And Diddy always supplied her and the sex workers with copious amount of drugs like ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, and ketamine. According to her suit, she would frequently get anxious before the FOs to the point she would become physically ill. But still, Diddy would shame her into performing for him, and if she didn't want to participate, she was met with anger and violence. In Rodney Jones Jr.'s civil racketeering lawsuit first filed in February of this year, he alleged Diddy had a habit of regularly drugging his party guests and having forced sex with men and women. Like the federal indictment laid out, Diddy didn't work alone. He always had a team helping him with his alleged crimes. Jones, who was also once in Diddy's inner circle, alleged in his lawsuit he was required to solicit sex workers and perform sex acts with them for Diddy's pleasure. Adult film star Adria English, who filed her suit against Diddy in July of this year, alleged she was groomed into sex trafficking over time by Diddy. In her suit, she said she first met Diddy around 2004, when her boyfriend at the time was auditioning for a modeling gig at Diddy's fashion line, Sean John. She claims her boyfriend and another model were asked to perform oral sex on Diddy in order to get the job, and when he refused, Diddy's associate offered him the job as long as Adria worked as a go-go dancer at his White Party in the Hamptons. She says at his party, she regularly had to drink alcohol laced with drugs like ecstasy. According to her suit, Diddy demanded she have sex with party guests, and if she didn't, he would tank her career and blackball her and her boyfriend from the industry if they didn't comply. Diddy's most recent accuser, singer Dawn Richard from Danity Kane, alleged in her lawsuit filed about a week before her former boss's arrest that at an after-party she saw a copious amount of illegal drugs, and the girls who attended the parties appeared lethargic or passed out while Diddy and his guests allegedly performed sexual acts on them. She alleged in her suit Diddy told party guests, "This is a buffet, enjoy yourselves. This is what we do. This is how we party." Under Diddy's federal indictment, it alleges the producer threatened and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires for years. When federal prosecutors announced the unsealing of the federal indictment against him, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams said the victims were filled with drugs to control them for long periods of time, with participants of the freak-offs typically having to get IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion.
The freak-offs sometimes lasted days at a time, involved multiple commercial sex workers, and often involved a variety of narcotics, such as ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB, which Combs distributed to the victims to keep them obedient and compliant. As alleged, when Combs didn't get his way, he was violent, and subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse so that they would participate in the freak-offs, and that Combs hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims, at times by their hair.
While arguing for bail after he was arraigned, Diddy's attorney reportedly told the judge it's not sex trafficking if the participants of the freak-offs wanted to be there. After Diddy was denied bail on Tuesday by a federal judge, his attorney, seemingly disappointed Diddy wasn't issued bail, said he'll continue to fight for his client.
So this was the first step. We have a bail appeal scheduled for tomorrow at 3:30 in front of Judge Carter, the district judge assigned to this case. I think that we made the points that we've been wanting to make. I think he came out. Mr. Combs is a fighter. He's going to fight this to the end. He's innocent. He came to New York to establish his innocence. He's not afraid. He's not afraid of the charges. There's nothing that the government said in their presentation today that changes anyone's mind about anything. He's been looking forward to this day. He's been looking forward to clearing his name, and he's going to clear his name. And we're going to stand by his side as he does. We believe in him wholeheartedly. He didn't do these things. This was a 10-year relationship. There's no coercion. There's no crime. There's basically just, someone who brought a civil case and now is finding themselves as a witness in a criminal case. And we're going to fight this case with everything we have, as is he. And eventually he's going to be shown to be innocent. And so tomorrow we fight again, and we'll fight every day until we don't have to fight anymore.
Now the once beloved, but also to some feared music mogul, will have to wait to eventually face his fate in federal court. I'm joined now by a really great guest, and that's the state attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg. Dave, thank you so much for joining me today. Now, Sean Combs, aka Diddy's arrest this week, has made headlines essentially across the globe as he's facing now these federal charges in the sex trafficking case in the Southern District of New York. And his so-called freak-offs are at the center of the prosecution's case. What are your thoughts?
Well, first, it's good to be back with you, Elizabeth. The allegations are horrifying. And my first thought was, how did these things happen for so long with so many people involved and no one seemed to tip off authorities? I mean, according to the indictment, these were highly orchestrated performances of sexual activity in hotels and other locations with drugs. They would go on for days. There were cases of baby oil brought in. There were IVs given allegedly to the victims to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. Were there doctors involved? Who else knew about this? What about the hotel workers? What about all the participants? And only until Cassie finally spoke up did this thing start to unravel. And kudos to Cassie. And my other reaction was, it shows you that people can make a difference in this. And one person speaking up can make a difference. It also shows you how laws can make a difference. The reason why Cassie spoke up was because the New York legislature passed a law that extended the statute of limitations for sexual assault cases civilly to create a new 1-year period that allowed victims to sue their alleged perpetrators even after the statute of limitations was long past. That's what allowed Cassie to come up with her lawsuit, file it, and that's what set all this in motion.
And reading through the many civil lawsuits that Diddy was already facing and comparing it to the indictment, you can't help but see a pattern of alleged abuse. Many of his accusers, even outside of Cassie, have alleged Diddy has drug/laced them, sexually assaulted or raped them at these parties. Now that Diddy has been arrested, could their claims in the civil lawsuits be used against him in the federal case?
Well, yeah, expect to see them testify in the federal case. Now, there's a different standard in civil and federal, in criminal law. We have to prove cases in criminal law beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil cases, just a preponderance of the evidence. And there's looser evidentiary rules in civil cases than there are in criminal cases. But do expect to see those complaints that were made civilly to come back against him criminally. Because when you allege something in a sworn pleading that something happened, yeah, that can come back in a criminal proceeding against Diddy as long as the statute of limitations has not expired. And in this case, you have this pattern alleged of racketeering activity, of sex trafficking, things that could put him in prison for the rest of his life. And so key to this will be the victims and the witnesses taking the stand if it ever goes that far. Now, for Diddy's sake, he's the big fish here, but I'm sure there are other big name individuals who were involved in this, who attended the parties and partook in this, and he may want to start singing because that may be his best chance to avoid the rest of his life behind bars.
And one of his accusers, Rodney Jones Jr., the producer who sued Diddy earlier this year, he claimed he was required to solicit sex workers for these parties. He said many in Diddy's camp were also required to do this. Does that automatically qualify as sex trafficking if they're recruiting these women, potentially even men, for these parties? And what does that tell you about the people in Diddy's inner circle and some of the requirements they had to do in a way to kind of meet his needs?
If women were recruited in the parties to have sex with other people in exchange for money, then that would be human trafficking if they were underage, the women, or if they were adults, if they engaged in this with force, fraud, and conversion and coercion, meaning that you'd have to prove for sex trafficking, if there was an adult victim, that there was force, fraud, or coercion. Otherwise, it's prostitution, and prostitution would not be just prosecuted at the federal level. It would be mainly a state crime. But the feds are looking at sex trafficking, which can get you up to life in prison. And the sex trafficking is really a serious crime that involves a commercial sex trade. But again, for an adult victim, you have to have force, fraud, or coercion. And that is what is being alleged here. You can coerce people into having sex with others, or if you drug them up to make them have sex with others, that would be enough to charge someone with sex trafficking.
And yesterday in court, Diddy's attorney made kind of an interesting argument. He said, is it sex trafficking if everyone wants to be at the freak-offs and wanted to be there? And the defense reportedly went on to say they don't want the federal government in their bedroom. What do you make of that argument? And do you believe that this is a case about just sex?
Well, that's why the judge denied bond. That's why the judge denied the defense request to let him out pre-trial in exchange for a $50 million bond, because he said that the alleged crimes here occurred behind closed doors. So the judge did not believe it was consensual. The judge believed you are hiding stuff behind these closed doors, and we cannot trust you to be alone with these people or to be alone with anyone, because you could do it again. And as far as whether consent is a defense to sex trafficking, well, it is if there's no force, fraud, or coercion. If everyone engages in commercial sex work voluntarily, without force, fraud, or coercion, then you could have prostitution charges, but that would be state charges. Here, the sex trafficking is because of the allegations that people were forced into it, or they were drugged into it against their will. So that's where the allegations come from. That's where the charges come from.
And just a few months ago, Diddy's friend, Stevie J, aka Stephen Jordan, he posted a video to his social media page after all the civil lawsuits with the caption, "This is what a real Diddy party looks like." It showed very high profile celebrities there. Do you think that these swanky parties that Diddy had were just kind of a mask of what could come after, essentially during these after parties or during these so-called freak offs? What do you kind of make of just Diddy's infamous parties that he's been so well known for before?
I remember watching South Park, and they had a whole episode about the devil trying to compete with one of Diddy's parties. Diddy did it. That was the phrase that they kept using. And back then it was kind of humorous because of his lavish parties. But there's clearly a sinister side to these parties, according to the allegations, that they involve force, sex, and drugs, and then using IVs to bring people back who were overly drugged and treated in such a way where they were physically totally exhausted by doing things that they were forced to do. I mean, it just sounds horrific. I mean, the cases of baby oil being brought in, it's something that makes me wonder how many people knew what was going on. Big parties are one thing, but when you start forcing people to do things against their will, and then you allegedly tried to blackmail them so that they're forced to do it by saying, we're going to show videos of you, we're going to extort you into having our way with you, or else we're going to expose your deepest, darkest secrets. That's a crime. And that's something that no one should be partaking in. And that's where perhaps some other big names will start to be revealed if they actually partook in this. Because what you saw here is a series of crimes, not just fun parties, but crimes.
And that also brings me to my next question. Do the celebrities and the others who have attended his parties need to be worried right now?
Absolutely. If a celebrity attended a big party and just hung out at the buffet table, that's one thing. But if you go into the other wing of the party where all the sex trafficking was occurring, yeah, you got problems. And their defense maybe I didn't know. Well, you can't stick your head in the sand and just say you're innocent. At some point, you have to be responsible for your actions. And so I've heard some rumors of some big names being involved. Not going to mention it because I don't have any proof, but it will come out if there's evidence that these celebrities partook in the horrors of the parties. So we'll see soon enough.
And are you surprised Diddy isn't facing any type of cyber charges given he allegedly filmed and kept recordings of these encounters at the so-called freak offs?
There could always be a superseding indictment, whereas the evidence comes in, they could charge him with other crimes. But right now, the crimes they're charging him with would keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. And so the feds may not think there's a need to do an amended indictment yet. Now, that could come. But I thought perhaps there'd be some federal firearms charges because I thought there were reports when they raided Diddy's places that there were people there with guns, and the feds take that very seriously if they're violating federal firearms laws. I mean, look at the assassination attempt against Donald Trump. You see the gun laws were the first ones to be filed. So perhaps that's coming, or perhaps they don't have enough evidence there. But generally, when the feds raid your place, come in, guns ablazing, someone's going down. Someone's going to get indicted.
And how hard is it to try a sex trafficking case? Given Diddy's enormous amount of power he had in Hollywood before, do you see there being any trouble with witnesses coming forward, even though Diddy is now behind bars?
I think the fact that Diddy does not have pretrial release, that he is behind bars, will encourage victims to come forward, knowing that they'll be protected, especially as the evidence mounts. All it takes is one to start, and Cassie was that one. And then you have others who followed. So there's safety in numbers, and I do think you'll see people testifying. And as far as how hard it is to prove sex trafficking, well, you have to prove it's a commercial sex act and that there was force, fraud, and coercion, or coercion, and that's what you need. It's a serious crime, and even if that can't be proven, there are racketeering charges involving other crimes. So there's other charges, and there could be more if there's a superseding indictment. But this is not looking good for Diddy right now, and that's why I'm thinking that perhaps his best defense may be to try to tell the feds about all the other people who were involved in this.
And, I was down at the courthouse just yesterday, and what I found kind of interesting in all of this was kind of how confident the defense seems to be throughout all of this case. I mean, now Diddy, who once was known to be untouchable in a way, now he is behind bars in a federal prison in Brooklyn. But are you surprised that the defense is coming off as confident as they are? I think they were kind of surprised that Diddy wasn't released on bail yesterday.
These are highly paid, highly powerful, and highly successful lawyers, and they want to give off the aura of confidence. You don't get to be where they are by running scared. Now, I do think they were surprised that an offer of a $50 million bond, an offer of lots of restrictions, home arrest, would be rejected. But the court did what the court needed to do because Diddy is allegedly a danger to the community and a flight risk for that matter, because he's got so much money. So I think the court made the right decision in denying bond.
And when it comes to the impeding trial that we don't know when it's going to happen yet, but when it comes to the trial in this case, what type of defense do you see them exploring for trial?
I think the defense has already been telegraphed. I think they'll say this was a consensual party. These were consensual acts. And if it was prostitution, those are just minor state charges, that there was not sex trafficking, that this was not an ongoing criminal enterprise of racketeering, that this is a music business with lots of wild parties, and he should be able to live the life he wants to live with people who are engaging in consensual activities. Now, whether a jury will buy that, I mean, it's belied by the evidence. The evidence has shown that there was some coercion, some forced conduct, some blackmail. And, all it takes is one witness to take the stand and say what she or he went through. And I think that's going to be very powerful evidence, because I don't think Diddy is going to take the stand here if it goes to trial. And Cassie, I think, could be a very powerful witness. And apparently there are others ready to go.
All right. Well, Dave Ehrenberg, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Before we sign you off, anything else about this case that you'd like to add?
I think it shows that no one is above the law. A lot of people thought that Diddy would escape this because of his wealth and his power and his prestige. No one is untouchable. And I think that it shows that if there's evidence, prosecutors will follow it and do the right thing.
All right, Dave, again, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
If convicted on the federal charges against him, Sean Diddy Combs faces a mandatory minimum of 15 years in prison and a maximum sentence of life behind bars. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.